For the men, they only have 50% of the qualification. They say, yeah, I got it. I can do it. And the woman can be fully qualified and it's like, no, I don't think I can do the job. There's this dimension of self-doubt and minimizing your ability. I think for women, it's important for them to push themselves. Be authentic, know what you're good at and what you're not, but also give yourself the chance. Don't eliminate yourself before you even get into the competition.
Welcome to the HR Impact Show, where we have honest conversations with global people leaders about their strategies in building great workplaces around the world. My name is Dorothy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Engage Rocket. Engage Rocket is a HR technology and advisory company that helps organizations improve employee experience from hire to retire. Today, we're joined by Joon Tan. Joon is the VP of HR for Global Marketing at Schneider Electric. She brings over 25 years of HR experience from various industries and have contributed to organizations such as Dell, United Airlines, SPH, and Mercer Consulting. Very excited to be diving more into her insights in building great workplaces, as well as her experience in encouraging diversity within the workplace. Welcome to the show, Joon. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. So for our listeners who may not know you very well, could you share more about your journey that spanned almost 30 years in the space of HR? You've been in various industries, in-house, and worked as a HR consultant. Tell us more about that journey and what led you to where you are today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I have to say that I'm an accidental HR. Growing up, I wanted to be a teacher because I came from a family of teachers, and I was contemplating whether I go into teaching curriculum in uni or do something else. Did a stint as a temp teacher and realized that the school was very dysfunctional back then, where a lot of trouble kids. When I went into NUS, I did sociology and social work. Graduated at the time when Singapore was going through recession. Couldn't find work in the areas I was interested in. So I ended up in school for the intellectually disabled minds as a social worker. In the first 6 to 9 months, I noticed that the special school need teachers with special training to be able to handle some of these children. Because they were a voluntary organization managed by volunteers, there was no clarity in training and development. So I organized a teachers' union for them. The chairman of the board saw something in me and they promoted me within 15 months to lead the adult learning. Long story short, I couldn't be a part of the union. I was in management now. Funding was challenging. I got frustrated. So I left. Chance upon the trade union movement because the trade union officer bumped into me when I was swimming at NTUC Club and said, "What are you doing now?" And I'm like, "Oh, I quit and I'm jobless now." So he invited me to go meet Lim Boon Heng at that time. And I ended up joining NTUC as the industrial relations officer. And that's how my HR career started. I started in the trade union movement at the early age of 27, representing all the foreign airlines that fly into Singapore. It was steep learning, but very grateful for the opportunity to learn about all the labor rules and regulation. Jakob was my mentor. She guided me on the labor regulations and policies. I spent about 1.5 years in that space, and then I moved in-house into the personnel admin department. I really wanted to experience private sector. One of the union leader referred me to his friend, and I ventured out after a few years into Panasonic Electric. It was a huge culture change for me. I'm very vocal and I always ask, why do we do this? Why do I have to put my phone in this box? They have 5S practice. So that season was really great, shaping me in terms of helping me to challenge all of the paradigm that I have drawn up for myself. Like, Joon will not do this, Joon will not do that. While it was a difficult journey, it was good in terms of my own development and also being resilient in the environment to say, okay, yeah, this is what it is. So how do I adapt? How do I make the best of it? One of the airlines came looking for me while I was in Matsushita. United Airlines came knocking and paid for my 3 months notice, paid for my maternity. It was a great journey because UA was going through quite a shift in their management philosophy. Starting that role was not easy because I was brought in for a specific reason to deal with some leadership issue they had there. But I spent 5 years in United Airlines and really enjoyed that time as well because it's a service sector, very people-oriented. It was an employee-owned company with great benefits. I had the chance to travel around the world with my family. 5 years into the role, 6 GM rotated through. So then I was still young and wanted to grow. And I felt that, okay, there's a bit of a glass ceiling there. Then I started looking out for opportunities. Now I ended up with Intel. The second time that Intel approached me, it was for a business partner role, and that's how I got into high tech back then. Spent about 3 years in Intel as a HR business partner for the sales and marketing team. Very intense environment, but really thoroughly enjoyed it because you work with really smart people who challenge you all the time. You need to know what is going on, what they're going to ask you, and be able to answer the why not. Then came my third child, and I had to cover a fairly large region, dual hat, business partnering as well as site HR responsibility. It was very intense, and I was pretty burnt out. Then Dell came along. I was headhunted by Dell to be their first ethics director in Asia. And I was like, ethics? I'm not trained in law. I'm not an audit person, but I'm thankful for that season because of the leadership values and the DNA of the leaders that I met were really smart, but also very human, very values driven. And I think that drew me as a person. But it was also something that I was very mindful because this would be a sidetrack for my HR career. I do want to come back to HR, but doing this program role gave me a bit more time to step back, a bit more time for family, for my church commitment. And so I took that bold step to try ethics and compliance. Staring at the underbelly of the organization was very challenging, but also in a good way, because there was the reactive, which is the investigation, the policies. Then there's the proactive, which is the education, the awareness building, and how you treat employees. The values align so well with me as a person. I'm like, I get paid to share godly values in the marketplace. Why not? Had a great leader, the chief ethics officer of the company, who was also my career mentor then. I grew a lot under his stewardship and leadership. And then 2 years into the role, it's time. We did make a commitment to June to bring her back into HR. And so they were intentional in enabling me to go to the R&D side of the world to help with setting up the office in Jurong to give me a fresh start. They moved me into a different area of the business altogether to give me that reset. I spent another 4 years doing different roles in Dell before Mercer came along. When Mercer came knocking, it was interesting. My first answer was no. But because it was a headhunter friend, I said, okay, why not? I had coffee with Paul. Paul was such a wonderful gentleman. And he said, okay, let's progress this. I had self-doubt back then and said no many times, recommended my contacts to them, but they came back time and again. And so eventually I'm like, okay, full disclosure, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, and they still want me, then fine, I'll take the chance. At that point, I was thinking, if there's an area in HR that is technical, it's the finance of HR and it's important and valuable. That skill set is valuable. You command a premium in the marketplace as well. So I went, and I have to say that it was steep learning, but I'm grateful because I had good bosses that just was patient with me. I also had great customers who were very kind, who understood that's really not my area of strength, but were willing to allow me time to learn. It was about applying myself in that context to learn as quickly as I can and to value add. And to look at the service we were rendering and saying, okay, what else can we bring to the table, right? Besides sharing the data, the survey data, what insights can we bring? What trends? Spent about 5 years there from an Asia Pac role to a global role. Then came Schneider. It was because I crossed paths with one of the ex-com member of Schneider when she was in Dell. And she came and approached me. She's a serial networker. She got in touch with me through LinkedIn and tried and interest me to join Schneider. It took about literally a year before I got my mind around that it was time to move on from Mercer, from consulting. I would like to go back to corporate. And that was one of the key driver. I think at that point, looking at the business and where else can one go, an industry in which you will have conviction. And when I discovered Schneider and how purpose-driven they were as an organization, I'm like, wow, energy crisis, climate crisis and what this company is all about was very compelling. And so here I am.
What strikes me about your sharing of your journey is that you didn't start out in HR, but when you entered the world of HR concepts can be applied regardless of which organization or industry you're in. What's interesting about the opportunities that were presented to you is that it's quite different. Every move was moving another field. You
Yes.
moved from airlines and then you had experience in media for a short
Yes.
stint. Then there's also high tech and also HR consulting. What would you attribute as unique about Joon that enabled you to really thrive in all these different experiences? So in some of our past podcast episodes, we also talked about building a portfolio career. Having that agility, curiosity, and learning agility to build a career where you try many different things can actually be very beneficial to one's skills and ability. So we'd like to know more about what is that unique trait or what do you attribute to being able to build that portfolio career for yourself?
I would say maybe three things. One is, as a child, I was always curious. I was always pushing the envelope. Of the four kids, this was the one that always asked, why cannot? Why can't I? And willing to learn. And maybe there was also a side of me that's very competitive. I always want to do well, make them proud, and be proud of myself too. That learning mindset and curiosity was important. I think two is also knowing who I am and my values and what's important and staying true to that. When you engage with people, whether it's vendor, colleagues, bosses, employees, and you're authentic, people appreciate that. This headhunter friend that I mentioned, she was a vendor in a company that I had worked with. She saw how I relate to her as a headhunter trying to pitch for business. I left an impression. That's what she told me. And she will always remember me. So I thank her for that. Also important is how you treat others. Do you see it as a partnership, regardless of the role the person has today? Because it's a small world. So your brand reputation at the end of the day matters as well. And then I think it's about applying yourself. At the end of the day, this is the world of work. What value do you bring to the table? When you apply yourself and you work hard, diligently, and you contribute, make a difference, I think that carries you over time.
So, Jun, I love that you talked about knowing who you are and also knowing how to apply yourself. But the reality, many people don't actually know how to do that. And I know you started a female mentoring circle back in 2018, right? Tell us more about what are some of the objectives you were trying to achieve with this mentoring circle?
So my first role in Schneider was talent manager for a global supply chain. And in the supply chain world back then, 2016, there are not many female leaders. One of the asks of the leadership was that we build that pipeline of female leaders for the company, especially in the supply chain world. I see mentoring as key to that. So I chanced upon this book, How Women Rise, by Marsha Goldsmith and Sally Hirgesin. It was the year 2 of me trying to run a mentoring program. Year 1 was tough because I had to curate those topics myself. Year 2, Marshall and Sally published this book and I chanced upon it and I bought it for myself. When I read it, I'm like, wow. It spoke to me. If I had my hand on this book way back, I'd probably be CEO or CHRO somewhere. Anyway, I worked with an intern in the organization. She was really a bright spark, challenging me like, we need to scale this. We need to make this big. So what we did was we took the 12 habits that was covered in this book and we had the leaders work along with me on sharing their experiences. We put our work before our career, all the themes in the book. So I curated it and enrolled my leaders around me to mentor circles of female talents in the organization.
Minimizing ourselves.
Self-doubt, minimizing ourselves, right? Which is very common. Annette, who recruited me into Schneider, she saw the marketing effort I was putting in. So we put it on our internal portal, trying to drive this campaign to enroll and awareness. She responded to one of my posts and I'm like, Annette, you're coming to Singapore. Would you like to do this kickoff with me? And she said yes. And my SVP for HR in supply chain also said yes. So they did a tech talk style with me. We had 120 people show up. They were all so excited about it. And so we then continue on right after that big launch into small circles. We met every 2 weeks or a month to have leaders mentoring circles of 5 or 6 female employees and talk through those topics. I had male colleagues who were like, we want to be part of this. Some of these habits are gender neutral, and some of it is cultural as well. So, yeah, I had male colleagues taking part. This has been 5 years, and they're still carrying on. I've since moved on from that role. The program took a life of its own because I think the topics spoke to a lot of people. So my colleagues in France launched it, and then in the US, and then even in the engineering R&D side of the house, we are also trying to grow female talents. They in fact paid for Sally to come and talk. It was encouraging to see how this had an impact on the organization and made a difference.
For any HR listening in, and if they're thinking about rolling out something similar within their organization, what are your tips as to how do they first get started? You talked about even marketing, which to me is socializing the idea, is change management. Any experience to share on that? And then what I'm curious to also know is, how do you measure success? How do you define ROI for a program like this, right?
Mhm.
With HR, sometimes our problem is justifying programs. Tell us more about your learnings.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. To launch a program well, you need to do a bit of marketing. You need to get creative around how do I enroll leaders to be part of that journey as a partner to launch. Annette did the first round, and that was with GSC. When I moved into the commercial side, I got my male boss to do a video to launch that and to encourage, inspire both leaders as well as employees to be part of that program. I think partnership is important. Sometimes we have a tendency to run programs like it's a HR program. I think that we need to be ambassadors to enroll stakeholders, let them have skin in the game, let them co-create with you. You raised an important point around how do you measure ROI? For me, it's not just the numbers, it's also seeing how people grow over time. Schneider is quite focused on this. We have what we call the ambition 50, 40, 30 in terms of growing the female pipeline in the company. We have a diversity agenda to say of people that we recruit into the organization, 50% of them should be gender diverse. Then 40% of our frontline managers should be female. Because if you really want to grow female in leadership, you have to start somewhere. And so 40% is a guideline that we use. 30% in VP and above should be female. All things being equal, the female should get a good chance and a shot at it.
So I have a burning question. I myself is a female entrepreneur, which is, let's say the stats are not in my favor. But something that I always think about is, because you talk about 50, 40, 30, these are hard metrics. How hard do you hold them to really hitting them? Because there is a balance that needs to be between hitting these outcome metrics, but also putting the right person in the job.
Yes.
How do you balance the two? Because sometimes I get it, I want to hit this outcome, but then also maybe the best person for a job just isn't a female, right? I've also seen the other extreme where because I want to hit this outcome, I force feed a female leader into it. How do you balance that within Schneider?
It's not easy. You always feel the pressure. Back to my point about my personal values as a leader, do the right thing. When you do the right thing, the right outcome will come. It may take longer, but I think in the long term, you will reap the fruits for the organization. It's easier said than done, Dorothy, to be honest. So we have programs that are intentional in creating that pipeline. But at the end of the day, I think we need to hire the right person and not be biased either way from a gender standpoint. That's what I adhere to. And I might miss my target, but it's okay.
And I think the origin of it, starting from this mentorship program that you started, that also helped facilitate that pipeline generation for these female leaders.
It's enabling, right? We also had sponsorship of female talent because after running mentoring for a while, I realized that in the boardroom, when decisions are made, you need people who will sponsor you, who know you and can speak on your behalf. It's different from mentoring. And so we started this as well. We were very intentional that it's commercial female leaders that we needed. Oftentimes, when you look at organization, the female leaders are in support functions, HR, finance, legal, but commercial roles, not so easy. And so you have to be very intentional in growing that pipeline. I started this sponsorship program for our sales organization. It was so heartening to see they took on bigger roles. They ventured out of their comfort zones, right, because they had sponsors who encouraged them to think beyond their current scope. Today, the zone president of Gulf, Middle East, she's a female talent, came from that program. She's a talent. That program enabled her to have that platform, to find the encouragement and support.
I really enjoy this conversation on female empowerment. It's very close to my heart. For any aspiring female leaders, regardless of what stage of career they may be in, what's your top advice for them?
There are certain habits that is just common to females. One of the dominant traits or habits that I've seen is minimizing self-doubt that often hold us back. And you often hear this, whether it's speakers, leadership speakers. For the men, they only have 50% of the qualification. They say, yeah, I got it. I can do it. And the woman can be fully qualified and it's like, no, I don't think I can do the job. There's this dimension of self-doubt and minimizing your ability. I think for women, it's important for them to push themselves. Be authentic, know what you're good at and what you're not, but also give yourself the chance. Don't eliminate yourself before you even get into the competition. Just focus on doing a good job and be responsible. If you do a good job, it will be recognized. There is also this dimension of needing to talk about your work and do your own marketing. Because guess what? You as a professional is also a product. And if you don't know how to market yourself, who's going to do that marketing for you? I know that most of us, if you're like me, I'm not good at tooting my own horn. And I don't want to come across that way. But I've also learned that it's a very practical world. If you don't speak about the work that you do, nobody's going to discover you. So it's finding the right opportunity to speak about your work, finding the platform to share in an authentic way. If you spend all of your time on social media bragging, people will know too. So I think it's about talking, being confident, giving yourself that chance, and also doing some marketing for yourself, and not to overstay in a role. Sometimes we are so focused on what we do that we miss lifting our head and looking at our career and asking ourselves, where do I want to be in 10 years, in 20 years? What work do I want to be doing? What impact do I want to create? Having that in mind is also important. Where I am today in the organization, we encourage our early career talents, as well as our talents in general, to think about their career as a T-shape, to build different bricks of experience. And the sooner you do that for yourself, the better you enable yourself to take on bigger challenges. And the earlier in your career, the easier it's going to be because your opportunity cost is not as high. You go try and test and learn. And in fact, this morning when I was queuing up for our coffee in the office, spoke to this young gentleman that was part of my early career program. And he was like, yeah, I really want to talk to you in December because I had this opportunity, but things move really fast. I've since taken on this role. Good for you. He was in one part of the business for a long time. And this new role takes him into different parts of our business. Schneider has a very broad spectrum of different lines of business. For him to build different muscles, I think is important. He's young. He can invest in that opportunity. If he doesn't like it, he can always switch. That's what I also love about Schneider, giving that platform to our employees to try.
So what I'm hearing is don't minimize yourself. Give yourself credit when credit is due. Self-promotion in an authentic way. No one's asking you to be boastful, but if you don't promote yourself, no one else will. Have the courage to just try new things, challenge yourself, and don't stay in comfort zone for too long. I want to extend the topic on diversity and move from gender, which we discussed, to culture. Culture in terms of geographical differences and nuances that we see, especially the fact that you have worked in many organizations that are very global in nature. Naturally, you hire a lot of different people from different backgrounds, nationalities. So how have you approached HR strategies or leadership development to take care of these cultural nuances, but at the same time, still have a uniform way of communicating things?
So I think for us, two things I'm really proud of. The multi-hub strategy that we have as a company. We don't have a headquarter per se. We have hubs around the world where employees can have global career. So like myself, I have a global role, but I don't have to go to headquarters, Paris, for a global career job. I can be based in Singapore and contribute. So we have a multi-hub strategy, and that sort of enable you to then hire the best from the market, to then be part of that whole leadership team. So as you can imagine, we have Boston, Hong Kong, Singapore, we have Dubai, we have Paris, and we have other satellites location as well. So there's really a diversity of nationality and background. It's already a part of the DNA of the organization. We have 35 different nationalities in Singapore in one building. That whole melting pot of working together is very similar. Maybe for me as a Singaporean growing up in Singapore, we don't think of race as something so different. We take it for granted. In the same way, Schneider enables that. The other thing that is really helpful is the intentionality in terms of designing our leadership program. I remember some years back, I was part of this leadership training in INSEAD, and we brought in Erin. She had a module that talked about the culture map, the 8 dimensions of culture, concept of time, concept of directness, Western culture versus Asian culture. So to us, if you're not aware, you're like, why so long-winded? In certain North Asian culture, it's this notion of suggestion versus telling you directly. Because if I tell you directly, I'll be rude. Whereas for some Western culture, being direct is just being kind. It's just telling you what I think. So for leaders to have that training and to be aware and to embrace different. And that's one of those core values of Schneider as well. So this whole notion of inclusion and embracing diversity in terms of upbringing, culture, race, and background. We are very intentional in designing into our program aspects, prepare our leadership, and for our leaders to talk about it. So inclusion is one of our core values.
Was there any cultural nuances that surprised you the most in your career?
As I look back many years ago, I was working in this tech company. I always found that my colleagues from emerging market never showed up on time. When they're finally on the call, it's so noisy. You can hear all the traffic behind, all the honking. I used to get so agitated until I visited that country. And then I realized you are at the mercy of the traffic. You're at the mercy of the conditions of the road. And so they want to be on time, but they just can't get there. Whereas in Singapore, everything is more or less organized. And we freak out when the train is late for 5 minutes. So I learned not to take those things for granted.
Which is exactly why I love that at Schneider, you are so intentional about training leaders on the 8 different dimensions of the cultural map and time and directness and all this things so that they are appreciative and it doesn't become a factor of inefficiency or ineffectiveness that affects the working relationship.
Creating a bias about certain nationality or talent.
What do you envision as the ideal workplace of the future?
If I may change the question a bit, repivot it, I would say what would be a healthy workplace? Because I think ideals depend on oneself, right? Your personal definition. I think a healthy workplace would be one where the environment or the culture is open and you allow yourself as a leader, your employees to really engage and interact openly. It's really important in the world that we are in today because no one person knows the answer to things. You have to collaborate. You have to, as an employee, as a leader, be willing to learn. My generation grew up without a lot of tech. This future generation, they are digital natives. They can bring in a lot of perspective. Their access to information can be a lot faster than us. So it's that openness to learn from each other is important. The openness to also allow people to experiment, to try, to test, to fail, or to succeed, to celebrate. For me, that's key. I've seen myself grow because I've been blessed with leaders that are open-minded in being willing to take a bet on me, giving me that chance or that platform to go try it and say, what's the worst case? You fail, you come back, you do something else. That gives employees that security and assurance. And of course, operating in a responsible way. You have a business purpose to serve, but I think that culture is important and being willing to listen, really listen. I have to say, I don't always succeed because impatience is one of my development areas. And I always have to check myself. Am I really actively listening or I'm listening to confirm my bias, my answer? So being able to create that, I think, is golden.
What advice would you give any HR professionals listening to this podcast that also wants to build towards that openness that you're talking about?
I think HR is an enabler for companies, and this could sound controversial, but I don't think HR can achieve such culture transformation without partnership from leaders. If you don't have the right leader with the mindset, forget it. HR can only do that much. So we're an enabler in organization. We can look at programs to create, to foster that. But I think leadership need to believe that's important and support that. I would start with looking at where you are today as a company. What is your mission? What kind of culture do you want to build for the organization? And then allowing HR to be that partner. Last month, we were at the FMCG company as part of a group of HR practitioners. And this lady who hosted us, I was envious of her because she had such a great partnership with her business leader. She could do a lot of disruptive things for the organization. And they had different interesting practices that I think was only possible because the leader gave her that free rein. And he saw the importance of breaking barriers for their people and gave her that platform to do it. I call them the power couple. When you find that power couple magic, it's really precious to preserve.
Throughout today's podcast, I picked out a few things from what you're saying. One is the importance of marketing, any new initiative that you might need to roll out and having a good comms plan around it. Second is leadership buy-in. Are there any other key ingredients you think are important in a good change management program?
I think it's also important to really ask oneself, what is it that you want to achieve? What is the end in mind? And that end in mind needs to be in alignment with business, because at the end of the day, it needs to serve a business purpose. HR professionals in general need to be more intentional that way to really ensure that you are aligned with the business mission, and whatever programs you run, the results will speak for itself.
I can hear our mutual friend from him rejoicing at he's always emphasizing how HR really needs to be a lot clearer on the fact that they are trying to deliver a business outcome.
Yes. And we also need to be better storytellers. It's a skill that I am learning as well. How to market through your story, the purpose, the process, the outcome that you want to achieve. I think it's a skill set that is much needed.
I couldn't agree more. And the very fact that Engage Rocket loves data, and that's partly what we want to do to help support these storytelling with evidence, with actual data that will speak to business leaders. Okay, Joon. So now I'll move on to a bit of a fun part of the podcast where I'll ask you a couple of rapid fire questions. I'll start with, I understand you're a pretty active person. So what's your best productivity hack to keep your energy level high?
I am a swimmer. I enjoy the waters. So I swim regularly, partly also because of my back problem. I enjoy it because that's when my mind frees up, and then you get light bulb moments in your 14th lap or your 16th lap. I come in, I'm fresh. I can go for the long haul. I exercise for the well-being of others because if I don't, I get cranky. So I swim, I go to Pilates, and whenever I can, I go for long walks with my husband. Swimming at least twice, if not 3 times a week, and Pilates twice a week.
What's the best career advice you've ever received?
Just try it. I mean, I didn't think of it that way back then. It was this boss of mine then, just try it. Just go do it. And what's the worst thing that can happen? There was a lot of self-doubt, this whole imposter syndrome. What will people think of me? What if I fail? When Paul gave me that confidence to just go try it, I'm like, yeah, why don't I just go try it, right? What can happen? And I'm ever so grateful for it.
Just try almost sounds like a slogan. Just do it.
Just do it.
What's the one book you would recommend to everyone?
The best leadership book would be 7 Habits. I know it's been out there for some time, but for me, kind of stayed with me. Begin with the end in mind, seek to understand before being understood. I think those are so core for us as HR practitioner, but also as a leader and as a person. On the personal side, it will be the Bible, where I draw truths and reflection. It's like a mirror in my face. For me, that's important.
I admire a strong faith.
Yeah.
And if you could have coffee with anyone living or dead, who would it be?
Lee Kuan Yew.
Amazing.
I cried buckets when he passed on. Why Lee Kuan Yew? I think he is a leader with great vision. Of course, he was surrounded by great leaders as well, but great vision, great courage, conviction. He was not the most popular, but he did what was right for the country. As we look back, we owe so much to him. I honestly think I would be very intimidated if I sat in front of him. That would be one person I would like to have coffee with.
And my very last question is, if you would like employees to understand one thing about HR, what would it be?
HR is there as a partner, an enabler. We're not your punching bag. We're there to partner with you. And I think, especially in today's day and age, HR also need to think of themselves as that, not the authority that will dictate the policy, but to be a colleague, a friend in the organization, listening to your employees, because they may have the answer to some of the challenges you're facing if you just put your ears to the ground. So as a partner, as an enabler, and also for leaders of organization to see HR in that light as well. That we're not just the admin people or the one that will give the unpopular answer to the employees.
I love that. Joon, I absolutely enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the HR Impact Show. If you enjoyed the conversation today, do like and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast app. You can also join our community at engagerocket.co/HR Impact. I'll see you in the next episode.